Baruch Spinoza's theory of determinism stands as one of the most powerful and unsettling challenges to human intuition ever proposed in philosophy. At its core, it attacks a belief most people never question, the idea that we are free, that we could have acted differently, that our choices are truly ours, and that we are the ultimate authors of our actions. Spinoza rejects this completely. According to him, the sense of freedom we experience is not proof of actual freedom, but rather a result of ignorance. We are aware of what we do, but we are unaware of the countless forces that make us do it. This gap between awareness and understanding creates the illusion of free will. To understand Spinoza's determinism, you must first understand his view of reality itself. Spinoza believed that everything that exists is part of one infinite substance, which he referred to as God or nature, Deus sive natura. This is not the traditional idea of God as a personal being who makes choices or intervenes in the world. Instead, it is an impersonal, infinite system governed by necessity. Everything that happens in this system follows logically and inevitably from its nature, just as the properties of a triangle necessarily follow from its definition. In other words, the universe is not a place where things could have been otherwise, it is a place where everything unfolds exactly as it must. Within this system, human beings are not separate, independent agents standing outside of nature. We are part of it. Our minds and bodies are simply modes, expressions, of this single substance. That means our thoughts, desires, emotions, and decisions are all part of the same chain of cause and effect that governs everything else in the universe. When you feel hungry, there are physical processes in your body causing that sensation. When you develop a preference for a certain type of music, that preference is shaped by your culture, your past experiences, and your brain chemistry. When you choose one option over another, that choice arises from prior mental states, which themselves were caused by earlier conditions. Spinoza argues that nothing escapes this chain of causation. Every event has a cause, and that cause has its own cause, extending infinitely backward. There is no break in the chain, no moment where something simply chooses itself, without being influenced. This includes human decisions. What we call a choice is simply the point at which a complex web of causes produces an outcome. The reason it feels like we could have chosen differently is because we do not see the full web. If we had complete knowledge of all the factors influencing us, we would realize that our action was inevitable. To illustrate this, Spinoza gives a famous example. Imagine a stone that has been thrown through the air. If the stone were conscious, it would believe it was freely choosing to move forward. It would be aware of its motion, but not of the external force that caused it. In the same way, humans are conscious of their desires and actions, but not of the deeper causes that determine them. So we conclude that we are free, when in fact we are simply following the necessary path laid out by prior causes. This idea has profound consequences for how we understand responsibility, morality, and even identity. If every action is determined, then in what sense can we say someone is responsible for what they do? Spinoza does not deny that human behavior can be judged or evaluated, but he reframes the issue. Instead of seeing people as morally guilty in a traditional sense, he sees them as part of nature, acting according to causes. A person who acts violently is not freely choosing evil in a vacuum. They are the result of factors such as upbringing, emotional state, environment, and biological disposition. This does not mean we should accept harmful behavior, but it does mean our response should shift from blame to understanding. Instead of asking, why did they choose to do this? Spinoza would have us ask, what caused this behavior, and how can those causes be changed? Another major implication of Spinoza's determinism is its effect on emotions, particularly those tied to regret, guilt, and resentment. Much of human suffering comes from the belief that things could have been different, that we or others should have acted. Spinoza argues that this belief is based on a misunderstanding. If everything is determined, then nothing could have happened. Regret becomes a kind of illusion, rooted in the false assumption of free will. Likewise, anger toward others becomes less justified when we recognize that they could not have acted differently given the causes influencing them. This does not eliminate emotions entirely, but it transforms how we relate to them. However, Spinoza does not believe that determinism leads to passivity or fatalism. This is a crucial point. At first glance, it might seem that if everything is determined, then effort is meaningless. Why try if the outcome is already fixed? But Spinoza rejects this interpretation. He argues that our efforts, thoughts, and actions are themselves part of the chain of causation. The fact that something is determined does not mean it is irrelevant, it means it has a cause. Your decision to study, to work, to improve yourself, these are all determined, but they are still real and impactful. Determinism does not remove action, it explains it. In fact, Spinoza redefines freedom in a completely different way. For most people, freedom means the ability to choose between alternatives, the idea that I could have done otherwise. Spinoza rejects this definition. Instead, he defines freedom as understanding necessity. A person is more free, in his view, when they understand the causes that determine them and act according to reason rather than being driven blindly by emotions or external influences. This is what he calls moving from passive to active states of being. When you are driven by uncontrolled emotions, anger, jealousy, fear, you are being acted upon by causes you do not fully understand. You are, in a sense, less free. But when you understand why you feel the way you do, and you act based on clear reasoning, you gain a form of control. Not control in the sense of breaking free from causation, but control in the sense of aligning yourself with it. You become an active participant in the unfolding of necessity, rather than a passive subject of it. This idea leads to what Spinoza calls intellectual love of God, which is essentially a deep understanding and acceptance of the nature of reality. By recognizing that everything follows from necessity, and by understanding our place within that system, we achieve a kind of peace. We stop resisting reality and instead come to terms with it. This acceptance is not resignation, but clarity. It allows us to live more rationally, to reduce unnecessary suffering, and to focus on what truly matters. Spinoza's determinism also has implications for how we see success and failure. In a deterministic world, success is not simply the result of personal merit, and failure is not simply the result of personal fault. Both are outcomes of complex chains of causes. This perspective can be humbling, it challenges pride and arrogance, but it can also be liberating. It reduces the burden of self-blame and opens the door to a more compassionate understanding of others. At the same time, Spinoza does not deny the importance of self-improvement. Understanding the causes that shape you can actually empower you to change. For example, if you know that certain environments trigger negative behaviors, you can avoid them. If you understand that certain habits lead to better outcomes, you can cultivate them. These changes are themselves part of the causal chain, but they still matter. Knowledge becomes a tool for transformation. One of the most controversial aspects of Spinoza's theory is its rejection of traditional notions of moral responsibility. If people are not truly free, then the idea of punishment as retribution becomes questionable. Spinoza would likely argue that punishment should not be about revenge or moral condemnation, but about prevention and improvement. The goal should be to understand the causes of harmful behavior and to create conditions that reduce it. This shifts the focus from judgment to problem solving. Critics of determinism often argue that it undermines meaning. If everything is predetermined, they say, then life becomes mechanical and empty. But Spinoza would respond that meaning does not depend on randomness or indeterminacy. Meaning arises from understanding, from connection, and from the pursuit of knowledge and rational living. A determined world is not necessarily a meaningless one, it is simply a world governed by laws rather than chance. In modern times, Spinoza's ideas have found support in fields like neuroscience and psychology. Studies suggest that many of our decisions are influenced by unconscious processes that occur before we are even aware of them. This aligns with Spinoza's claim that we are conscious of our actions but ignorant of their causes. While the debate over free will continues, Spinoza's perspective remains highly relevant. Ultimately, Spinoza's determinism forces us to confront a difficult question. If everything we do is determined, what does it mean to be human? His answer is not that we are powerless, but that we are part of something larger, a vast, interconnected system governed by necessity. Our task is not to escape this system, but to understand it. In that understanding, we find a different kind of freedom, not the freedom to have acted differently, but the freedom to know why we act as we do, and to live in harmony with that knowledge. So when you feel like you are making a choice, Spinoza would ask you to look deeper. What led you to this moment? What forces shaped your preferences, your thoughts, your desires? And if you could see the entire chain clearly, would you still believe you were free? Or would you realize that, like everything else in nature, you are following a path that could never have been otherwise?